Um, I took on a sort of controversial assignment a couple of years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, to write an analysis, a fairly searching analysis of 25 years of independence for Eritrea, because I had been following that since before it was independent. And so I knew a lot about it, had followed it, knew a lot of people in the EPLF, and had actually discussed with them some of the ideas around their constitution and all kinds of things, because I knew people who knew people. It was that kind of thing, even though I never, I would not be allowed in that country right now. But the point is that I took this, I wrote it really quickly, which you never do with academic writing. I wrote the thing in a weekend, okay? I had a lot of material. I banged out this draft, and I made the mistake of hiring a student to edit it for me, someone who otherwise was a very good writer and everything else. But the student didn't really understand the source material and didn't check the footnotes, even though I asked that that be done. And then it was my fault, though, because without then going back and rereading that draft one more time, I sent it into the journal. Okay. Now, as it turned out, there were only a couple of things for which there wasn't a source or something like that. And it was a first draft. But the problem was, because I had written it in a way that it was uncompromising as a critique, and it referred to them as a totalitarian state. I made mention of the fact that they were the most militarized society other than North Korea, and a lot of other things. Well, a bunch of Eritreans were reading that. Okay. And it was, I practically got death threats, okay? It was my fault, and it was my responsibility, because I needed to give it that one more read before I sent it out to a volatile bunch of readers who hated what I was going to say. What I'm saying is, there's no room for error when you're dealing with an intrinsically hostile readership, okay? You don't have that. You don't have a hostile readership, but you want to make sure that you're showing me that I should have confidence in your understanding of this material. So are there any questions on this last assignment in terms of the final written version of it?
Well, I have a question, because I don't see a place to submit the outline. Because you said the outline
Module
needs
5,
to be submitted, and then there's the final.
No, it says Module 5 presentation notes. That's what I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, well, I'm there, I'm looking at it, and it just says final draft.
No, that's the one
So if I
below.
put that
I don't
in,
think
That's the
there's
one
an
below.
outline due for that.
Okay,
below it,
there's Module 5 presentation notes, and then right below that, there's a link that says upload final draft of Module 5 assignment here. So the notes are
Okay, so-
outlined. Say again?
So it's two separate papers, though,
Yes.
right?
No, well, it's not two separate papers. It's two parts of one assignment. The first part is
Right.
the notes from which you draft your final version. I want to see those, because I want to see how each individual prepared the assignment before drafting the final version. What I'm trying to do here is, among other things, is gather some data, because one of our biggest problems here is undergraduate students who cannot write. Okay, they're otherwise lots of skills, very accomplished, but cannot write, just cannot write in comprehensible English. There's something functionally wrong there that we need to catch and fix. And so one of the ways I'm trying to do that is to look at the way students prepare their writing and then compare that with their final version. I'm going to do a content analysis of all this stuff and a bunch of other stuff you don't need to worry about. But I finally decided, after years of struggling with relatively ineffective undergraduate writing, that I needed to take it on myself and try and figure out what I could do to try to improve your capacity to express yourself in written language, because that has become a serious problem, not just at SOU, but nationally. Every one of my colleagues, wherever they are teaching in the country, is saying students can't write. It isn't that they can't think, they can't write. They've lost the ability. Even students who normally get really good grades and things as writers would have been considered like C+ to B- students, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. They're now considered A students. Because what I have to evaluate is, well, okay, this is terribly written, but the substance is not inaccurate. Okay, what kind of grade do you give that? because here's my thinking. If you were to go out into the real world in a job that required you to write, and you wrote as poorly as many undergraduate students do, suddenly it doesn't matter what you know. You can embarrass an agency if you're working for an agency, or a company if you're working in the private sector, simply by being inept on the page. I think one of our responsibilities is try and catch you before you fall, and identify that as an issue that needs to be worked on. Okay, because most of you are not nearly as effective at writing as you are at thinking. The idea is to get your writing ability so it's up there with the level at which you actually think. Okay, so that's what this is all about. Now, are there any other questions on that? The notes or outline or whatever you use before the presentation goes in the Module 5 presentation notes link. It's what's called a journal. Okay, it's just a way for you to dump a bunch of text in there. You can cut and paste it if you want to, right? And then the final assignment, and I'm giving you until next Friday, not this coming, but next Friday, the last day of term, to turn it in. Okay, so you can't say you don't have enough time. You've got plenty of time, and I want you to be able to relax and spend some time with this assignment. Okay, it's due at 11 o'clock, like almost everything that I do. Okay, now here's one thing I'm really going to lean into. I will not accept any late assignments. If you don't make the deadline, you get an F on the assignment. Okay? Are there any questions about that? Because I've got only a certain amount of time to grade all the assignments. I've got 3 classes full of this stuff, plus other assessment work I've got to do. Okay? I want to make sure that I have enough time to give a fair reading and evaluation to your assignments. Okay? I don't want people fooling around and getting late assignments. I also, if you don't contact me and we don't have an agreement, I won't give you an incomplete. Okay, you got to be more clear about these kinds of things. Okay, you need to simply complete your work, just like you would if you were getting paid for it. Okay, any questions about that?
I have a couple like guideline questions, I guess, for the assignment. Do you have potentially like a page length that you're looking for,
No.
or a paragraph count, or
No.
anything like that?
No, because most writing assignments in the real world don't say, give me this and make it 17 pages. You have to write until you said everything you need to say.
Right. I mean, I feel like that's pursuing like a writing career, but I understand.
I don't understand what you mean by pursuing a writing career.
Like journalism, like obviously they don't give you a writing prompt, but that's
They don't anywhere. Nobody does anywhere. If you're asked to write an office memo or something like that, no one says, in 2 paragraphs, tell me this. They say, hey, listen, I need a memo on this. Crank it out and send it here. That I want you to get used to that. That, unless there is a reason to assign a page length, and in my world there never is. Some people are very effective in 3 to 5 pages or 2 to 3 pages. This thing, I could see you doing a really good job on this in a page and a half if you really understand what you're doing. There's no reason to go. I would say there's certainly no reason to go more than about 2.5 or 3 pages. Because if you are, what you're doing is you're just dribbling on the page. Do not use extensive block quotes. That shows me that you don't understand the quote. If you just have to lift a quote and drop it in, the likelihood is what you're really saying without realizing it is, well, this is something the author or authors said. I don't really understand what it means, but I think it's important. Okay, that's not going to help you. That's not going to help your assignment. Okay, I want you to be able to capture the meaning of what the writers are saying. Okay. All right. Anything else before we go into our presentations? Okay, let me get rid of this. I mean, this is, I don't know, it sort of sounds like, this is a really big, huge thing. This is a very straightforward assignment. There's nothing exotic about it, okay? It's a page and a half. It is essentially a clear, systematic, written version of what you're doing in your presentation, okay? So it shouldn't really, if you've done, and a lot of you have, most of you have written pretty good notes on whatever your assignment was. All you need to really do is shape that up and refine it into a final draft of an essay, and you're done. It's pretty straightforward, okay? But you do have to submit, if you want credit for the assignment, you have to submit both parts of it. The Module 5 presentation notes, some sort of outline or notes or something, and then the final draft of that. You have to do both, and a few of you still haven't done that, okay? Be warned, all right? Just because, it's a good system to learn. Okay, now, who wants to go first? Well, let's see. I'm feeling weirdly patient. In fact, I may just go get some more coffee.
You want to know which group is going to go first? Because I thought.
I do. Well, I want to know.
group
Are we going to go in order?
first.
Well, I'm giving you the option. If you want, do you want to go in order? What do you want to do?
Yeah, gender equality can go first.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's hear from gender equality.
All right.
Because that's important.
Gender equality means that the different behaviors.
Wait, whoa. Gopala, you're reading.
What?
I just want you to talk to me.
I mean, I wrote down what I was gonna say.
I know. And remember when I said last class, I said if you
I got kicked out of class.
Okay, well, I didn't kick you out, but
No, I know.
No, what I'm saying, hold on. What I said was, this is important. If you've written something down, that's great, but don't read it to us. You can refer to it. Okay, I want you to get used to speaking extemporaneously, right? To being able to just talk about something. And again, like I don't know how many of your faculty, for example, when they come into lecture, how many of them, first of all, do actually lecture, but also how many of them do you see where they have notes? It used to be really common. These old fossil professors would come in and they'd have the cobwebs and stuff and these old notes that they've been reading from for 25, 30, 40 years, right? And they would start reading. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting in the back. I worked on a grounds crew when I was an undergraduate. So I was always real sweaty and funky and everything. And I was also older than everybody because I was like pushing 30. And I remember thinking once, I should just do something really, really violent in this classroom right now to get this guy's attention so that he actually realizes he's alive. It was that bad. Well, probably you're not that bad, but I want you to talk to us, okay?
Okay.
You know what you're doing because you've written it down. Just give us a real quick flyover of whatever your part of the presentation is.
All right. Okay. So basically, what?
Did he just vanish?
Oh no.
I tell you, man, the zombies have invaded Zoom today. You know what's sad is he's probably really embarrassed too, and that's too bad. So no laughing now. Not much anyway. I mean, we're not laughing at him. We're kind of laughing for him because he's no longer here. All right, until he finds his way back into the mysterious realm in which we now live and clearly do not thrive. Who wants to pick up the thread? Because now we'll never know what he was going to say unless he comes back. Come on now. You got to be able to run with this. You got to be sharp. Save us.
Okay.
It's live TV.
Well, we're the gender equality group, and we felt like we still have a lot of boundaries determining with gender inequality, especially towards like globalization. Globalization is really like still huge with the gender gaps and the wage payment roles. And
stop right there. When you say that something is huge, what do you mean?
I mean, like the problem, like we still have that huge like gap between men and women when it comes to globalization and gender wage payment.
Has anything changed?
Yeah, so it has changed. Like the ICT, which is the Information and Communication Technologies organization, is trying its best to make sure that women do have more of an opportunity, like especially in other countries. I know. Sorry, Shelby was going to talk about like phones for.
Well, go ahead. You can hand off anytime you want.
Okay,
that's
sorry.
fine. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Shelby, do you want to run with that?
Sure. So let's see. So as far as cell phones and internet, there's been a lot more information gained for both men and women, globally, domestically, and locally. It said so in the article. So for example, some data that was provided was in 1998, 20% of people in developing countries had cell phone subscriptions and only 1% in the developing world. But then in 2009, 100% had subscriptions, and then 57% of the developing world had subscriptions. So it raised quite a bit. In high-income countries, a wider percentage of the population was able to have access to this. So as opposed to the same years, it was 12% to 64% of the population. There's also, with manufacturing and services and things like that, there was a lot more faster growth in developing countries for female employment.
Why would you think that there would be faster growth in developing countries?
I feel like males are needed in a different area of work. So if the females are doing manufacturing type services, the males are either working out in the field, or they are or they're at war or something along those lines.
Well, think of it this way. When sometimes you'll look at relatively what are sometimes called less developed countries or least developed countries, and they'll have something will happen globally, right? And all of a sudden they'll have these, as they say on the East Coast, huge growth rates, right? Their economy will really look like it's exploding, right? Their GDP goes up, their overall productivity appears to increase and everything else. Whereas these big, massive economies like the United States and the EU and China, their growth rates might be, they're always single digit, except recently because of COVID and all that, but normally we have what look like slower growth rates. Why is that? I'm not just asking you, I'm asking you as a group. There's a logic to that I want you to think about, that is part of what global economics is. Why do these smaller economies seem to, when they change more dramatically over short periods of time than the established developed economies? This is simpler than you think. But it's important for your discussion of globalization, or I wouldn't distract you with it.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm trying to.
Okay, let me make it easy, okay? They have a longer way to go to start with, okay? And so any change is a dramatic change. See, when you get a change in a complex, developed society, it's often going to be kind of nuanced and incremental. You impose that change on a society that's in sort of early stages of capitalism, for example, or early stages of industrialization, or early stages of integration into a global economy, it's going to have a more seismic impact on their society and their economy. So it's going to look like a more dramatic change. And I mean, it's going to be a more dramatic change. Please don't misunderstand me. But that's part of what I think this article doesn't help you understand. It doesn't quite explain why sometimes those changes seem as dramatic as they are. So I'm just trying to help you out a little bit there. Let me ask you, though, in terms of, let's take this systematically. Think about this for your summary assignments. Okay. What are the major factors? I would argue that, oh, Gopal is back. Hold on. Let's let him back in. That's good. The article mentions three things that are kind of driving this. It says several factors associated. I'm in the summary part of it, by the way, which is all you were required to read. If you read the article, that's great, but it's 26 pages. So that, you do what you need to do. Several factors associated with a more global world strengthen the incentives for action toward greater gender equality. Those three things are really important. We've talked about them or around them in some ways in some of our earlier discussions. Again, that's sort of the logic of the class, but okay, what are those and why are they so important? Those three things. Let's start there.
Like the forces or the new forces of globalization.
Yeah, it says several factors associated with a more global world. Remember when we were talking about globalism several weeks ago? I actually mentioned some of these things. If you're in the summary, it's right about in the middle of the page. And it's 3 bullet points.
I mean, like economic advances, integration, as globalization is expanding, countries are becoming, more and more connected or whatever. Also, I think in tangent with that is also kind of like the technological advances and like the diffusion of that. Like we were talking about earlier, cell phones are becoming a more prominent thing that people are using. And information's also, I think, was the third one. It's becoming a lot easier for people to like have access to information also, we can Google anything we want.
Well, it's not that we can. It's not just that
But
They also
that
everyone
a
else.
lot of people can. But also, this is important.
countries are sorry.
What I'm trying to get at is one of the things that's always driving change, they refer to here as peer pressure.
Yeah, like
Oh,
lot
good. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted
no,
you.
you're totally fine. So, speaking of peer pressure, a lot of the countries, they like bring out agreements or treaties, and it really sets up like this dilemma that you should follow you should follow these, and because if you don't, then you'll be looked badly upon the other countries, which could affect your growth rate and your globalization and
Your ability to integrate globally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So part of this is there is the question in terms of the legitimacy of the state, right? They need to maintain their legitimacy. That's the source of their power. In order to do that, at some point, they need to become, the argument is, they need to become responsive to the demands of their people, right? As people are exposed not just to more like, Google and stuff like that, but things like entertainment media that come from more liberal democratic cultures. They see that and they think, why can't we live like that? Sometimes this happens. It'd be like, well, that's so cool. Not only do they have fast cars and attractive people, but they get to vote and people listen to them and they're not treated like animals. We should demand that. Where did the idea come from? Exposure to media. This is the theory, okay? And it builds on the point that Jackie's making. It's all about your ability, first of all, to recognize where you are globally and to recognize where you could be, and then to recognize what are the steps we have to take to become a more productive workforce, a more stable and secure society. That means you got to be more inclusive. If you have diversity, you have to find ways to integrate that diversity into some kind of collective polity of some kind. Otherwise, you're going to have an inherently violent and unstable and unpredictable society. If you have that, this was, I think, Jackie's point, people looking to invest in your economy, integrating you globally, they're not going to make the investments there. They're going to, I think, Jackie, that was what you were implying, and that's a great point. Okay, so tell me a little bit about that. The idea that the thing about globalization, all of a sudden, it's not just domestic pressure. The world's watching you in a way that they never could before.
Yeah, so like backing up on that, the world is like, it's kind of like a we're all in this together thing, because every country has like their own thing to like give to everyone else. And when you're seen as this country that discriminates against women, it really does put that label on you that, hey, you're not like that good. We shouldn't be investing with you, because then it makes us look bad. And then like the whole world, it's just that whole system that keeps falling.
So what you're saying then, and I'm asking the rest of the group this too, is part of this at least that there's a moral argument for this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what I'm suggesting is that's true, but there's also an absolutely cold-blooded economic rationale for doing this. What happens, for example, when more women come into the workforce and when more women come into education and when more women have access to information and resources and what's called agency? What happens then? What happens to your economy? Come on, you feminists. Stay with me now.
Doesn't it get like better?
Better how though?
Right.
That's right. But
Well, I mean,
this
if you
is
have,
the idea.
if you even just like not thinking about like men and women, if you have more people who are part of a workforce who are contributing to that and, creating stuff or selling stuff or whatever, right? That just is going to continue to like, go into that.
Right.
Another thing would be fair wages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Walk me through that, Shelby. Fair wages.
So if women are now included, then there's better working conditions for all of them as a whole. So like what I was saying earlier with the whole data thing, how things are increasing, depending on where they're working, they're paid more or paid better. And
okay, but what I'm asking is, let's assume that that's happening, and the article suggests that in some ways it might be. Why is it not morally good, but why is it economically rational for a domestic economy to do that? Why would you want to see that? Not because it's a nice thing to do. But what's the economic advantage of having a more inclusive, diverse workforce? And in this case, simply bringing in, more women into the workforce and into education and all the other things we've talked about. What is the economic benefit of that?
Well, we were talking, it says trade openness is a positive thing. The spreading of information and communication technology, and growth in exports. So those are all economically positive. So there's
How are
more
those
of
though,
this.
how are those related though to affording significantly more agency to women? Opportunities, education, points of access, fair wages. Where do women come into this idea of the benefits to trade?
Oh.
Let me put it this way. Okay, if you have a society where, because of, let's say, pre-industrial morality, ethics, religion, tradition, whatever, you take half of your potentially productive workforce and you don't allow them to learn, you don't allow them to read, you don't allow them to have any agency over their lives. Does that sound like a recipe for success in a global environment, or let's say an increasingly globalizing environment? Does that sound like a good idea?
No.
I don't mean, is it immoral? Does it make economic or material or rational sense? No, it doesn't. Okay, so the idea here, you're all kind of close to it, but the idea here is the economic rationale is that how much loss of efficiency, productivity, and genius is there when half of your population, more or less, right, is really not allowed to contribute to the productivity of your own economy at a level at which they could very well do if they had this increased agency, if they had better education, if they had the, the access to information that all of you have talked about, but education is so much more a part of this too, right? And if they were given fair wages, let's just take the United States. Who's most likely, pretty much statistically most likely, to live in poverty? Single women with children. Why? Because they lack agency. Okay, this isn't a moral argument. I mean, could we not make a moral argument for that? Certainly, if we wanted to, right? But what I'm saying is, we don't even need to. Even if we're just mean, nasty people, but we want a profitable economy, we can say, I don't care about women. I care about productivity. We have to, we have to give these women more agency, because, that might mean part of giving them agency might be, working with men to have them understand more about what parenting is and the responsibility for their children or whatever. That clearly is starting to happen, okay? But in addition to that, simply because a woman who has children becomes widowed or divorced should not almost automatically ensure that she's going to be in economic dire straits. And it wouldn't, the logic goes, I'm trying to reason back to Shelby's point about wages, if she was being paid what a man would have been paid. The problem is, more often than not, women are not, and especially not only in the United States, but when you look at the developing world, they might be paid nothing. Okay, you see how this works? So this is why the argument is suggesting there are these pressures coming from multiple sources as a consequence of increasing globalization, the net benefit of which should be significantly elevated circumstances for more and more women around the world. That's the theory. Now, do we see it happening? Can you think of examples? Or did they give us any examples in the longer article where you think, oh, gee, look, there's evidence that this theory has something to support it? Or, maybe something you heard on the news or something you know about from another class where, good things have happened because more women have been given, we'll just speak generically, increased agency.
Well, I read at the start of the globalization part that sometimes women are doing so well that they're able to switch the generals back at home with like husbands or something like that. Like their husbands are now the ones working from home, and now they're the ones that are going out and like providing for the family because they're doing so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's not. I would say it's still not common, but
Yeah,
it's
it's not
certainly more
common,
evident
but
than it
still,
once
it
was.
still can happen. And
It also suggests that more women are getting those opportunities that give them more agency. For example, I hate to keep using American examples in an international studies class, but we're sort of the benchmark that people often look at, whether they should or not, okay? One of the things we see in the United States right now is that historically, up until relatively recently, more men than women were going to universities. Well within my teaching career, not my lifetime, but my teaching career, those numbers have been turned on their heads. So that the ratio of women to men in four-year university programs right now is about 55-45. And you know what's more important, though, is it's not just in the disciplines, you know, the social sciences where we don't get any money and no one cares and we get no respect and all that. We're talking about STEM programs. We're talking about business programs. You know, more and more women, especially in STEM, more and more women are coming into the sciences. You know why that's important? Because that's the future. Okay. In other words, going into a creative writing program ain't the future. Going into STEM is the future. You know, getting an MBA in a capitalist economy is the future. And we're seeing more and more women doing that. Okay. All right. So that would be an indication that it's changing in the United States. But what we're talking about is there an echo effect of that beyond the West? And generally speaking, this is happening throughout the Western democracies, so-called, right? But are we starting to see indications of that in, you know, sort of the middle class countries or even the developing world, where we're saying, well, see, this is an opportunity that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, women would not have had. That has the potential for transformative change.
yeah.
I'll give you a funny one. When the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan in 1979, and they helped install a pro-Soviet regime. Keep in mind that the leadership in Afghanistan had, going all the way back to the early 20s, right, had entered into agreements with the Soviet Union. So there was a predicate for radicalism and socialism there. Okay. But there was a lot of resistance to that regime. It wasn't necessarily because they were communist, as it would have been, say, in the United States. It was because they were modernizers. And one of the things they were really pushing, however imperfectly, right? I get it. It's Soviet socialism, it's fascism, whatever it was. But they wanted to increase industrialization. They wanted to expand education, and they wanted those opportunities to accrue to women just as they did to men. That was in many people's minds in Afghanistan. Remember, this is a largely tribal culture. All right. That was worth fighting for or fighting against, because what they represented was global modernization, Soviet style, okay? So that was an attempt to impose it from the outside. I mean, and impose it at the barrel of a gun. That's globalization. It is. Globalization isn't all happy, shiny. Some of it's enforced at the barrel of a gun, okay? But what we're looking for is, because, say, people had more exposure to Western media, you know, music can be incredibly influential. Okay, pop culture, we're going to talk about, you know, pop culture can be incredibly influential globally. What this article is suggesting is, yeah, you know what one of the influences is? This too could be yours. But your society is going to have to make some changes for you to get there. I saw it in West Africa when which is, you know, spent most of my time in Nigeria, which is not at all what you would think of as a kind of, you know, egalitarian civil society where women are afforded all kinds of opportunities and everything. It was, in that sense, very, very different. It was, I don't know, it was the United States in the 19th century, I guess. Very traditional. Women were expected essentially to be either decorative or be workhorses. I mean, that, to put it bluntly, okay? But they started listening to like female R&B singers. And so you won't remember this probably, but there was a woman from Nigeria, her name was Sade. And she had a couple of pop hits like in the late 80s, early 90s. She was an absolute icon there. So all of a sudden, women were emulating the way she looked and the way she spoke and things like that. Now, that's a Nigerian talking to Nigerians. But it became important because she was important globally. She was important as a global figure, even though for a lot of you, you might be, I don't know who that was. The pop star, they come and go. But at that time, she was considered very important. You know who else was the number one most important pop star in Nigeria in 1989? Michael Jackson, not a Nigerian, Michael Jackson. Because again, he was a person of color. He had music they dug. He was wealthy. They didn't know about a lot of the other things of his life or anything, but it was, that's what I'm saying. This is the power of pop culture. You can reach people in a way that governments can't, that military shouldn't, and you can influence people. So what else do we deal with? Is this article, I asked this about our other groups, is it basically saying, hey, this is working, or is it like, well, this is the claim, but on the other hand? What do you think? They talk about potential, but do they really give you much of an idea that, boy, this is really happening? As opposed to, well, people say it happens, and it could happen, but other things have to change. Or is there any suggestion that there are obstacles? Any reason to think that there might be obstacles to the influences of globalization?
There's always like the old ways affecting that come into like the new ideas, like the old ways still, like I read this up, like the old ways are still like being meshed into like the new ideas that people are coming up with to try to make the world a better place globalization wise. But what happens is when these old ways come with these new ideas, they kind of collide, and it doesn't really help the situation. It can sometimes make it worse.
I think we also make a really fundamental error as analysts when we think that everyone means the same thing when they say the world's a better place. Or, even more importantly, that most human beings really care about making the world a better place. That's a dangerous assumption. Either because what it means to make it a better place means one thing to us, might mean another thing to someone in Somalia, right? Or someone in Vietnam or Laos. Okay, their idea of better place might have nothing to do with what you think is cool. It might not have anything to do with a culture of convenience and social justice warriors and cancel culture and all that stuff. It might have, and indeed it has, almost nothing to do with that. I guarantee you, when people are being beaten to death and disappeared in places like Laos right now, it's not because of cancel culture. It's not because they can just say, well, we're going to decide that we don't like you. We're offended. It's not about being offended. It's about being killed. And again, those governments don't have any interest in making the world a better place. They're trying to stay in power. So globalization has one significant obstacle, which is the durability of a traditionalist state, kind of like what Jackie was talking about, the resilience of those traditional values. If you think about Samuel Huntington's model of the clash of civilizations, okay, that's a point of resistance to globalization. Remember, because his model is important because it doesn't suggest that the real power is in sovereign states. The power is in these overarching environments of ideas and values. And people, he argues, are fighting and dying over those things. That's a resistance or reaction to globalization. Terrorism is often understood to be, in part at least, a rejection of globalization. The Islamic State wanting to have a pan-Islamic caliphate. That's to insulate the Islamic world, theoretically, from globalization, to go back in time. A lot of people in Afghanistan don't want to go into the future. They want to go back 300 years. Okay, or whatever it is, right? So the challenge of globalization, not only for women, but for any kind of change, is that change changes the stable basis of tradition. And tradition is often very stubborn. We're seeing that in the United States right now. We're seeing it with the rise of obvious public white nationalism, but even more than that, of the idea of the new Red Scare, this new terror about socialism. Nobody in the rest of the world cares much about socialism, really. It either works or it doesn't. And to the extent that it works, we see it. But in the United States, we have this long-standing, almost primitive rejection of strong states and collectivism and stuff like that. And you're seeing a lot of people, Democrats as well, it's just not a Republican thing, who are really concerned about, the squad and, the younger, more leftist Democrats and things like that. Those are the kinds of traditional obstacles. I mean, Joe Biden, the incoming president, notwithstanding Donald Trump's projection of the election, he doesn't represent change. He doesn't represent the future. He represents the status quo. He's almost 80 years old. He's not a revolutionary. He's not a young person's president. He's not the future. He's got that office, if he can keep breathing and stay healthy, for 4 years, and then he could very easily be booted out of it. Okay, that's because of these powers of reaction. Okay, so think about that when you're thinking about your summary. Anything else in there that I forgot that we didn't get to?
I mean, I think we talked about it all. Yeah. I know like the ICT, like going back on it, it's still like working hard today to make sure that women have more of a equality chance, like work-wise or just living-wise, because gender equality is still like a huge thing that we still need to work on. But I think if we keep it up, we could hopefully eventually make some change happen with our world. Yeah.
Okay, but the last thing about that, and then we'll go into the next group. There's a lot we could talk about there, but when people say gender equality, what do we mean? How do we know gender equality when we see it? How do we know? I mean, are men and women equal?
I mean, men and women are equal. They should be treated with
I mean, naturally. Are men and women naturally equal?
I mean, when it comes to like job wise or like payment wise and like globalization, I mean, women are not as treated as like high value compared to like men are. And I feel like it just needs to change, I guess, because women are just like as strong as any man can, like women are just as strong as men are, and we shouldn't be paid less just because of what gender we were born with.
Wait, what about that? Is the idea that, well, women are just the same as men? Are women just the same as men?
Oh, they're smarter and better.
Well,
we know that's not true. We actually know that.
No, technically we're the same. Like we were both born the same. Like we should, but there is a difference between equality and equity, which is true as well.
Okay, that's what I was kind of looking for. Can we look at that just a little bit before we go on to the next group? A lot of times when people say equality, what they really mean is equity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Men and women are not equal. We're not naturally equal. That's a fact on the ground. Okay. In the same way that no 2 or 3 or 20 or 5 million people are really all equal. We don't have equal capacities. We don't have equal drives. We don't have equal physical capacities, mental capacities, or whatever. But the problem is, assuming that those shake out on gender or sexual lines blurs the idea that there are women who can do things better than men can or whatever. And that's where this notion of what Shelby mentioned with equity is. So when we're talking about equity, what are we talking about? The assumption of equity is not everyone's the same or everyone's equal in everything. What is the basic assumption of equity?
Equity is essentially fair and impartial. So like that everything is fair for everybody, even if it's not equal. Like it's hard to, yeah.
Nailed it. See, this is the thing that your generation's going to be struggling with. Our generation, I guess, if we could generalize, was thinking we just need to make everything equal. It's like we should just all like be equal and like if we want to get high, we should do that equally, right? And if we want to like not go to war, we should do that equally, man, and stuff. and we should all listen like equally to the same, music and stuff. No, it's not about that. It's about whatever your capacities are, whatever your origin is, whatever your sexuality is, whatever it is that you are, needs to be treated fairly. I mean, you think about the socialist notion from the Communist Manifesto: from each according to ability, to each according to need. That's not equality. This is what's not understood about Marxist style socialism. That's not equality, that's equity. Because not everybody can contribute the same things. You contribute up to the extent of your ability. And as far as what you get what you need. Different people need different things. A physician is going to need a lot more expensive apparatus to do her job than I need to do my job. So that physician should get more. And what Shelby would be suggesting then, if I'm understanding you, Shelby, is that wouldn't be equal. It isn't equal. It would be fair, right? Is that what you mean?
Can you reword that? Sorry, I was responding to something.
Okay. Well, I'll use the same example. All right. If you think about someone who's a first responder in COVID right now, right? One of the things we're seeing right now is they're going to get the vaccine first. That doesn't seem equal. It's not. You know why? Because they're at greater risk than I am. Because I don't meet any of the other, and I'm not over 65. I don't have any pre-existing conditions. I don't have any health issues at all, right? I don't need that vaccine first. They do. That's not equal. It's fair.
I agree.
Okay, that's equity.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things about gender equality is that often, I'm suggesting that you think about this, that often when we get into those discussions, and more importantly, when we get into those arguments, what we're really forgetting is we're not assuming everyone's the same. We don't want everyone to be the same. We want everyone to be treated fairly. That's an important distinction, I think, that Shelby brought up, that I think it's really easy for us to overlook. That was what I was kind of looking for anyway. Does that make sense? Just a thing to think about going forward is that sometimes maybe in different societies, maybe equity is evaluated differently too. What's fair for us might not be fair for somebody in a more traditional society. Then we have to make the decision, well, is it really our right to intervene in their sovereign society and somehow tell them you have to live like us? I mean, does that really seem fair? Doesn't, to me. I don't think.
I have a funny, ironic thing having to do with fairness and equality. So this is a good example of right this second. So we all did equal work as far as this presentation, but I do think that it's sadly unfair that Kapala, sorry if I'm butchering your name, didn't get to talk, and they're having problems with the Zoom call. So like, I feel that we've all done proper work. It's just
Zoom is
fair. Yeah.
Yeah, so Zoom is fascist and we're not. So what we have to do is bash the machine. We can't do that as long as COVID's raging on, because I have to have a way to blab at you and you have to have a way to show me how smart you are. That's a great point. See, I love it when we get these concepts and then we can run with it. Gopala, did you have anything to add to that since you sort of unceremoniously abandoned ship there? But she's probably not there. Okay. Mystery grows. All right. Anything else? Do we have any questions on that? Anybody who wasn't in the group has questions or comments about that? All right, then let's look at this magical thing of sort of global culture and pop culture. And let's look at that. See if you can, among other things, see if you can figure out why I even included this. Who wants to start?
So the article talked mostly about how the United States is the biggest producer of pop culture and they send it the most to other parts of the world. We will have like TV and movies that'll play in most of the other countries in the world. We've also brought fast food restaurants and consumer goods to most of the world as well. And that causes problems for other countries' cultures getting overshadowed by American culture. They show a statistic about American films in the world market, And in 1987, American films were 56% of the world market. And in 1997, it had grown to 90%. And the European countries didn't like that because it was overshadowing the things they were making. So they put up protective measures, which have dropped it down to 60% since then. And that helps their culture thrive because they're able to show their things more than it getting overshadowed by what the Americans are putting out. And
All right, so part of it is that when we talk about globalization and culture, we often bounce back on the idea that what we're really talking about is the dissemination of American popular culture. And Americans can be all excited about globalization and diversity and all that because American pop culture is dominating that. Okay, and in order to slow that down a little bit, to mitigate the effects of that, and we haven't talked about what those are, countries, and we're not just talking about developing countries, we're talking about so-called developed economies. We're talking about France, we're talking about Canada to some extent, in particular, have actually had to build institutional barriers to the ability for American pop cultural product to penetrate those markets. China has even more obvious limitations on that. There's a strict limitation on the number of American films that can be screened legally in China. And those are almost always like big, loud action movies. And the main reason for that is because dialogue isn't important. They're just visual treats, okay? Why should anybody care? I mean, who cares what movies people watch? Who cares what music people listen to? Because the one that's really not included here, they mention music, but I don't think they necessarily appreciate how powerful music can be. Maybe I'm biased because I play music, but why? So what? I mean, so people watch American movies. So what? He devils advocates. Why is anybody worried about that? I mean, the French are pissed off about everything, right? They're not an empire anymore. Is that what it is? It's just, they got nuclear weapons. They're kind of halfway in and halfway out of NATO. They've got a certain amount of sovereignty. Why do they care if people are watching, American zombie movies?
I think the influence of what they're learning and what they're viewing is affecting their way of life wherever they're at, whatever country they're in.
How?
It influences, well, they see a movie and they want to be like Superman, or they want to be like Anne Hathaway, and so I think those influences affect the society.
Well, what's the matter with that, though? I mean, think about what we were just talking about. Hold on. Think about what we were just talking about. The advantages for women of the globalization of values. Where does that come? More than any other way, it comes through entertainment. There's no more powerful medium of global exchange right now than entertainment, pop culture, right? And we were just talking about how that could actually be a benefit for women because people, can see these things, or they can Google and find these things, and there's all this American stuff, and they look at these powerful women, and look at this and look at that, and look at their tolerance of people who aren't sexually binary, I mean, wow, we're leading the league in everything in terms of pop culture. What's the matter with that?
Nothing. And I think it inspires people, like in that movie about the African American women that worked in the space program. I mean, I think it opened women's eyes to maybe getting into engineering, and they don't have to be held back.
But again,
I thought that was inspirational.
But if that's the case, then what's France's issue? What's Canada's issue? I mean, look, we're giving you these cool things to look at. We're inspiring your young women to want to do better as they mature and acquire more agency, and they see more possibilities in their life. I mean, my God, America is a force for good in the world. Because I will help you.
We're setting an example of greatness.
Because a lot of the ideas that we export are shit ideas.
Oh.
There's a lot
Well,
of
I think
violence.
the problem that a lot of countries have is that it's like a lack of control. If they're not controlling the entertainment that's being produced, then they have less influence over what ideas they're promoting. If they're just leaving it up to American pop culture.
Yeah, okay. Well, remember when a few weeks back, and we were talking about different ways to look at globalization, and we talked about, we talked about a few things, but one of the things that we talked about was that what's a culture, what's a nation, and what's a state? Okay. Well, nations are constantly in the process of formation and maintenance. They don't just happen organically. They're created artificially. They really are. The United States as a nation had to be created. It didn't exist naturally. Okay. And when you add to that more ethnic diversity, more diversity of people from around the world, different generations of immigration and all that kind of stuff, it becomes that much more complicated. If you're trying to make sense of that, and then some big, powerful, sewage press of stupid pop culture starts swamping, particularly your young people, with American style this and American style that, all of a sudden, it's like, well, where's their culture? Where is it? How do the values expressed in mainstream American popular culture play out in the educational system of Germany or France, or in the churches in the Middle East, or that would be, I guess, the mosques, but you know what I'm saying. In other words, the cultural mainstays are challenged because America has very little by way of cultural mainstay. We don't have a central church. Americans don't identify with their government. Americans, about the only thing Americans identify with is poorly spoken English. And we all agree that is important, and pretty good teeth, But other than that, our culture is a culture of radical individualism. It isn't authentic, but as an ideal, it's what we aspire to. Every individual matters. Never mind that the rest of the world understands what nonsense that is. Americans don't accept that. Okay, and our pop culture reflects that. So what do we have? The culture of the anti-hero. That anti-hero can be someone who might be a villain in another culture who we make into a hero. That's not going to play well. It's not going to play well in the Philippines. It's going to sell well, but the government's not going to like it. It's not going to play well in China. The government's not going to like it. The leadership's not going to like it. There's going to be traditional resistance to that. Okay?
So Emma should go next. Emma, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
We already kind of talked about it, but the entertainment industry is a very important industry in the US. It's one of the most big economic industries. It has a really large impact on pop culture. Like, think about Marvel movies, DC movies, and Star Wars. Those movies are viewed on a large scale in America and in other countries. They've dominated the European film industry. But we don't really see movies from other countries in the theaters like other countries see US films in their theaters. Like, think about how we never see Studio Ghibli films in theaters unless they're showcased in a limited event.
Okay, we don't, but hold on. We don't, but we know that you know what they are.
Yeah.
So we must be getting them.
Yes, but it's not in the same way. They're not advertised in the same way that Marvel movies may be advertised in Japan.
Right. Okay.
The spread of US entertainment benefits both the US economy and foreign economies because the foreign companies make money off of selling US products. So that could also be a big factor in why US entertainment spreads so much. In other countries.
Well, other than the United States, who's got a big film industry?
Ooh, India.
India has a huge film industry.
England does too.
Not really, no. They have a very small film industry. They always have had a really kind of, for one thing, most of the energy in the UK goes into television. But even if we include that, it's much smaller than India or the United States.
Yeah.
Part of this is that there aren't a lot of other. Ricky, were you talking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was saying, doesn't South Korea also have a pretty big film industry? I mean, Parasite won like Oscar for best movie or whatever.
No, they don't have anything like as big a film industry. They just don't produce as much content. I'm just talking about, I'm not talking about the quality of it.
Yeah, quantity.
Right. I'm just in terms of being able to spew out, pop culture, just like a meat grinder.
Nigeria?
What's that?
Nigeria?
No, very small because it's very expensive. Big by the standards of West Africa, but small globally. Let me give you some perspective on this. Okay, would you agree with me that if we could lump in sort of the entertainment industry altogether, and let's say we don't include sports, okay, which are entertainment, but in terms of just like Hollywood movies and the music industry, let's say, okay, what percentage of the American economy in terms of GDP do you think that would be? Of all the things we produce?
What percentage would be American? Is that
No,
what you're
what percentage of our economy would be entertainment?
Ooh. That would be a lot, but.
Well, how much is a lot?
Well, in my report, I'm doing beauty, and the beauty business has $330 billion industry a year.
But that's not entertainment.
$330 billion, but that's beauty.
Creativity.
Yeah.
I mean, we sell billions of dollars worth of dog food every year too. Essentially what we identify as Hollywood accounts for about 3% of GDP. That's enough to make or break an economy. Because if you take 3% away from a developed economy and their annual growth rate is 3%, you've just put them into a recession.
Wow.
I'm trying to give you a perspective. Okay. Yeah. Most of the rest of the world isn't like that. So what I want to get back to with the group is why is it a problem? I still haven't heard a really clear explanation of, because the article suggests, I think the tone of it is sort of cautionary in a way. It's sort of like, there are some real problems with this, because if there weren't problems, then countries wouldn't push back and they wouldn't limit import of content and stuff. What are the problems? Have you ever heard the term cultural imperialism? That was a big one in the 80s. The idea behind cultural imperialism is that it's part of what in international relations terms people refer to as soft power. Your ability to influence outcomes beyond your own country. What are the things that allow you to do that? We know that one of them is a powerful military. Nothing speaks louder than an unused nuclear weapon. Okay, just knowing that you have it makes you dangerous, and so makes you influential. But we know that's not enough. Otherwise, North Korea would really be driving policy, because all they have is nuclear weapons. They got nothing else that anybody wants other than energy for China. Okay, but soft power is part of it is your standing in the world, your ability to persuade through influence, your ability to persuade through argument, through diplomacy, through negotiation. Part of that is the perception of the values and substance of your culture. Are you considered to be on balance, humane people? Are you considered to be, do people know what you're talking about? Do they get the joke? There's a classic example of this when Nixon allegedly, probably it was true, was speaking when he went to meet with Chairman Mao in the midst of Watergate. And he did what American politicians never should do, but always do, a very Rotary Club thing. He opened with a joke in front of communist China, right? And of course, you know, he tells a story, you know, oh, very funny, and probably a swear word in there somewhere. And then he finishes the joke. There's a slight delay for translation, but the translation is like a sentence, and then everybody laughs. And then Nixon comes up to the translator, like, by golly, you did a heck of a job there. And he said, no, I just said the president has just made a joke. Please laugh. Right? So the idea of soft power is that doesn't have to be explained. People kind of get it. So it's not surprising that so little has been done to regulate Hollywood. There is no governmental agency that has any direct influence over Hollywood. Hollywood has never really meaningfully been censored by the government. It hasn't. In other words, we don't have anything like the FCC for Hollywood, for movies, or for music. You know, we tried to do that with the little stupid warning labels and stuff, you know, thank you hip hop and Frank Zappa, but, you know, no one takes it seriously. So it's a deregulated industry that's incredibly powerful and incredibly profitable. So it's this engine that can't be stopped. It's an influence machine. Its primary influence is buy. More than anything else, pop culture is trying to get you to spend money you don't have on things you don't need. You don't need to listen to American music. You want to because you're used to it. How do we decide in the United States whether or not something gets awards, like gets a Grammy or gets a whatever award? Whether you know it or not, it's not you who decide that. It's not. It's influencers and leaders within the industry, because they still determine to some extent, notwithstanding streaming and things like that, they still determine who's going to get the awards. It's not always who's the most popular, or much less who's the best. Same thing with, you know, the Academy Awards. That's decided by an academy. That's not decided by us. It's not democracy. We're told what the important films are, but we're not told by the government. We're told by the industry that makes them. That's a lot of power. And there are a lot of countries out there that don't want that power exercised over their people. Okay, so talk to me a little bit about some of these consequences, and, you know, some of the consequences of pop culture, because we think of it as trivial.
Well, I wanted to say, because in my topic is beauty and pop culture. And in a lot of what I read in that article, the manufacturers of the beauty companies are telling people what beauty is. And for, I don't know how long, 100 years or whatever, they think beauty is a blonde, blue-eyed girl. And so that's kind of getting ruled out now, thankfully. But the big industries, the companies that are selling all the cosmetics, are telling people what they think beauty is. But what I found in this was I broke it down to the products that are being sold internationally and how pop culture sets the international standard of what beauty actually is. But in every country and region around the world, they celebrate their own cultures and they believe what beauty is. They don't necessarily need to have America or anyone else tell them what beauty is. But because of globalization,
okay, hold on.
You know, most of these countries are influenced.
Okay, if that's true, and every country has its own standard of what beauty is.
Yeah.
Why, particularly in parts of West Africa, is it so common for women to try to lighten their skin?
Yeah, so that's part of my article too. China and India. China's the 5th largest industry in China is beauty, the beauty industry, the 5th largest. And China and India, both men and women, buy, I don't know, millions of dollars worth of beauty products to lighten their skin because they believe it's going to give them a better life.
Why? Where did they get that idea? I don't think they got that from Chinese.
Well, they got it from the Western influence, I'm sure.
Okay. Does having lighter skin give you an advantage?
Yes.
Who said yes?
It definitely gives you an advantage.
What's the advantage that it gives you?
You're more likely to be able to get a higher paying job.
Just simply because you're white.
Yeah.
And your
Yeah,
evidence
that's
for
what the
that is
article said. Yeah.
what is the largest ethnic group in the United States living in poverty? It's white people.
Really?
Yeah, by far. It's white people. What's the largest ethnic group by population historically that's on death row? It's white people. Where they get executed in most states. It's white people. The problem is proportion. So we shouldn't automatically assume that there is such an automatic thing as white privilege. Tell that to poor white people and they don't know what you're talking about. What we're talking about in terms of this notion of beauty as it relates to culture, it's what's called the aesthetic of the culture. What are the values in terms of what is desirable? What is what ought to be leadership? One of the things we know from a number of studies, okay, in the West, not just America, but throughout the West, is that there are a couple of, physiognomies, physical appearances, phenotypes that are automatically more likely to be associated with power. Okay, one of them is height. The taller you are, that the more likely you are to be able to find yourself in a position of power. It does not mean that there are not lots of tall people who have no power. Look at all the people who failed in the NBA and couldn't get work. What are you going to do with a guy who's 6.5 feet tall, and doesn't have enough ability to make it as an athlete and never got a good education, So it's not automatic, but it is an advantage. There are certain facial features that people automatically associate with legitimacy, authority, power. Okay. It doesn't mean that everyone who looks like that is going to be successful. It means they have an advantage.
That's true.
Right. And I think, Mary, was it Mary? Did you make the remark about that? I think that's what you were thinking about. It's not just being white, but there's no question that, it can help. Being white can open a door that not being white might leave closed, I think is what we mean. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. But then again, if you look at American films, increasingly, what you're seeing is people of color and women and people of different kinds of sexuality are becoming much more prominent in the American popular narrative right now. It seems to me that if we believe in, as we said earlier, making the world a better place, then we'd want to see that happen. Wouldn't we think that would be a good thing? We're also seeing this, by the way, in the UK. In fact, I think arguably, in terms of, I watch a lot of Brit television, I think they've pushed harder for diversity in a country where it's arguably much more controversial in many ways. But nonetheless, that is a Western thing. Western television, Western films are much more visibly diverse now than they ever were before, much more. Where's that liable to be a problem?
I don't know, Iran or Iraq.
Why?
Because they don't look at women the same way everyone else does.
Well, actually, yeah, they do.
Do they?
Yeah, I mean, Islam looks at women the way most of the world looks at women, as inferior, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's the fact on the ground. We got over 7 billion people. The majority of those people live in cultures where women are considered inferior.
That's so funny. I've been a woman all my life, and I never felt inferior.
Well, no, again, it's about what people
I don't know.
It's about what people value. So what we have to think about is, if you live in a culture where women are supposed to know their place and men are supposed to be ascendant and be authorities, think about a lot of the Trump support right now. It's from disaffected white men. It's not because they're evil people. It's because they don't like change and they don't like the idea that they're going to have to share what little they might have with women or with people of color or with anybody because they don't feel like they have much to share. Okay? It doesn't make it right. It makes it make sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you've got countries whose cultures are predicated on that, where that's not a minority view. That's not a marginal view. That's the core of their society. And that is much of the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
We have to keep that in mind. The fastest growing religion in the world right now is Islam, just because of birth rates. Okay, that's important. And those cultures do not want their people exposed to this malignant virus that is open, liberal, tolerant culture, because that to them is dangerously decadent and destructive of their traditions and their values. And so they're going to fight it. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, what else? Anything else?
Well, Ricky has something to say about fashion.
Oh, fashion's incredibly powerful. Go ahead, blast off. I want to hear this.
Well, sorry to disappoint. I'm actually not talking about fashion. I have celebrity activism.
Oh, that's even better.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's
Why
right.
should we take these people seriously? Please tell me why, Ricky.
Yeah. So the article that I read talked a lot about Bono and his activism for people suffering with AIDS. So that was kind of the focus of it. But the argument that the article makes is that the US tends to distrust politicians, but continues to trust celebrities. And other, not just politicians. It says that the media tends to promote celebrity opinions on things instead of listening to experts and that kind of thing. So there's just a few different avenues where we value celebrity, pop culture, influencer input over people who are certified in their fields. So that was something that I found really interesting.
Okay, why do we do that? Because on its surface, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It would be like saying, listen, I've got a BA, an MA, and a PhD. Okay, that's all I got going on in my life, right? I'm not cute, smart, or funny, but I got documents, right? Should I teach this class, or should I'm trying to think of some goofy YouTube influencer or something. I just can't come up with a good name, but you know what I'm saying. In other words,
yeah.
Would this class be better for you if it was taught by a celebrity?
No, and I think that the reason that we value celebrity opinion is because primarily by the media, we are so taught to romanticize the celebrity, the rich lifestyle. If we're spending our whole lives wanting to be like someone else who's rich and famous and seems to have everything easy, that makes us want to listen to what they have to say, listen to their advice, so that we end up in the same privileged lifestyle.
Yeah, I think it's about that. First of all, we see a lot more of entertainers than we do of politicians. They're just more visible. But also they're visible in ways that we at least think we understand. You don't have to know much about the architecture of music to enjoy pop music. You don't have to know much about the construction of films or the actual narratives they're portraying to enjoy a good movie or, long form television, because you've got these people acting like real people to whom you can relate and with whom you can empathize. Politicians aren't like that at all. Washington, D.C. is referred to as Hollywood for ugly people, and that's for a reason. These were not people, generally speaking, who were the best at what they did other than politics. You get a few people who were like that rockhead sort of captain of the football team or, whatever they were, But most people who go into politics aren't the kind of people who you would stop on the street and say, man, I would do what you tell me to do. But celebrities are decorative. They're successful because all those features I was talking about that we associate with power or influence or desirability, that's how they make their career. Politicians, a little bit less so. It helps to be tall if you're a politician. It helps to have a good speaking voice, but since no one speaks well anymore anyway, that doesn't matter very much. But they're just more visible. They're more a part of our life. So it's more normal for us to listen to them. Also, they're cooler than us. But I think Ricky raises a great point. It's like, yeah, we do. There's a lot of evidence to suggest we will take the word of a pop star over an expert any day. Just about, at least a lot of us will, especially the younger you are, the more likely you are to do that. But, it's not just young people. Culture's powerful. And the thing about pop culture is it's not just this innocuous fun thing. It is an industry whose primary bottom line necessity is turning a profit, opening people's wallets, getting them to slide that plastic, spend money you don't have on things you don't need. And
Yeah,
we do.
the article that I read about celebrity activism brings up that point. It says, quote, social activism is considered a modern form of currency in Hollywood as it serves a major role in forming the public persona of the actor.
Mhm.
So I think that's a problem with our romanticization of pop culture, is that it's not always being done for the right reasons. You know, if a celebrity can make a buck off training people to think a certain way, they're going to do it, whether or not, you know, not blanket stating. Not all celebrities might do that, but it can definitely be, it's a corrupt system.
Well, either that or you get, like, you go back to the 80s and, you know, the Richard Gere's and people like that who were all talking about the Dalai Lama. Never mind that they knew nothing about the Dalai Lama. They knew nothing about what that regime had been like before the Chinese butcher shop came in, and assumed that it was this idyllic, wonderful place where no one was exploited and everyone was beautiful. It was not. It was, you know, a terrible regime. And they didn't know or didn't care about the Dalai Lama's historical association with the CIA in terms of fighting communism. They didn't know a lot of those things, and they didn't care. They were ignorant. They're not experts, but it doesn't matter. They sound better when they say it. And they're better at saying things we like to hear. That's why Ronald Reagan was so successful as a president. He didn't know most of what he was doing. He didn't have to. He had a good script. Really good script. And was very good at delivering it. He really was. For 8 years as a really old guy, you know. All right, anything else? The main thing, obviously, the point here being, even the things that we often take as trivial or just fun or whatever, it all has power. And when you export that power internationally, you can create tension and resentment. Okay? Globalization's not all nice. It's not all fun, and it's not all positive. But it's happening whether we like it or not. All right, I think we're done. Are there any, you know, last minute questions about the assignment or anything like that? We don't have to meet next week. If you want to meet with me individually and you want to, you know, it might just be an exchange of emails. You know, if you want to send me a Google Doc to respond to or something, if you're just not sure, that's fine. Otherwise, as far as meeting as a class, we are done. And you should, you know, try and finish this thing up. And try and enjoy next week, and then get this stuff out of your system. Have a good holiday. You know, enjoy your family insofar as you can. You know, I don't know how I'm going to do that with my dad, but you know, we'll figure something out. I don't want to make him sick, you know, any more than I normally do when I show up. Anything else?
See you in future classes.
Okay. Well, have good holidays and enjoy your break.
Bye.